since that's why he's not here today. Neil, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much for that introduction. I'm assuming everyone can hear me okay. You never know with these remote sessions, but just shout if you can't.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so yeah, thanks for the great introduction. As you heard, I'm a publisher and I specifically work in educational publishing and I work with school textbooks. And I was quite involved in PASA a few years back. I sat on the digital subcommittee, which I'm not sure if it still exists, but I've always had an interest in the digital side of publishing and what technology can be used to either enhance the product we produce or in fact even produce new products. So that's where I've ended up looking at this fascinating new technology, which I'm sure everyone has seen all over the news. And every time you open a website or something, you'll see something new about artificial intelligence and what it's going to do and all the scary stuff it can potentially do. And yeah, there's a lot of media attention at the moment. What I've tried to do in this presentation is just bring it down to how I think it could potentially impact publishing and what we as publishers can do to start exploring and experimenting and getting our heads around these tools to see if it actually would be useful or not for us as publishers. So yeah, for the past, I guess since the beginning of the year, I've been experimenting and playing and, looking at what can be done. And this then presentation is, I guess, an outcome of that process. Okay, so why am I interested and excited about this technology? There's a number of reasons. The one is that it is moving very fast and, it seems to be doing new and amazing things every time you open your browser. I've also read somewhere, and I don't know if this is going to be the fact or not, but some people have likened it to the invention of the internet, and it could have that big an impact on society. But that's obviously something you'll only notice looking back. The other thing I like about it is can potentially automate some of the more boring and routine aspects of our jobs. So anything repetitive, anything that is going to take a lot of time, there potentially can be some ways to make it quicker and automatic. So for example, I have some processes where I have to move data from a PDF to a spreadsheet, and it's kind of tricky and it kind of takes a fair bit of time, and I'm going to see if I can actually get it automated. So that's one sort of little aspect of our day-to-day lives we can do. The other thing which I find quite interesting is that it allows for innovation and creativity in jobs where we might have, we might do the same thing over and over again. We can now start thinking, okay, how can we do them differently? How can we improve on it? What else can we do? And the fact that it's chat-based, talking as you and I would be talking now, that's how you talk to these systems. It means it has a democratizing effect as well. So my brother, who is a marketing person, is teaching himself how to code using ChatGPT, and he's teaching himself how to code with Python, which I think is incredible. So, it kind of allows people without these skills to get them. And the other thing which, is something which is not related to work or anything like that, but it's actually fun. I mean, I'm sure people have, you can ask it to tell you a joke. You can ask it to make you a little rhyme or a song. You can get silly images done. So there's a whole lot of things that can be done with it that sit outside of pure productivity and work. Okay, so this is a brief outline of what I'm going to run through. Do an introduction to generative artificial intelligence. Very brief, high level. I'm sure most people have maybe played around with it, but this will just, a structured introduction. The importance that I think it might hold for educational publishers. some of which is relevant for general publishers or trade publishers as well. Challenges and risks. I'm sure everyone is going to immediately jump up and think about intellectual property, which is what our business is, and that's a major one. And then skills required to use this technology. And this is just a brief sort of overview of the skills that I think would be useful for us as publishers to start upskilling our teams in, which I've started to do in a small way with my internal team and with myself as well. Okay, so let's start with the introduction. So what exactly is generative AI? So it's a software. It's a software as other sort of software that we use. The main difference is that it's been trained on vast amounts of data, and that data comes from anything that's been published online. Wikipedia is a massive source of this data that it's been trained on. And so it's trained on the data, and then it's trained on the patterns that it learns from data. So patterns in the way that words are connected and follow each other. So it's predictive in that sense. There's a standard way that words follow each other when we talk. And then also in terms of images, how images look and how they should look and what colors they should be and things like that. And then what we do, we provide it with an input. So that's us as the user provide an input into these AI systems, and the system then generates some kind of new content. And it's not just drawing content from a database, it's actually creating that content from scratch on the fly. And that content is anything from text to images to videos it can do, audio. I've seen some quite scary things where it can replicate people's voices, PowerPoints, a whole host of other files as well, Excel files, any sort of computer file that can actually work with as well. And this is just growing. More and more companies are doing more and more things with it. All these images you see in this presentation, they all are AI generated. So I've done them in a piece of software called Discord, which is one of the big image generators. And so these kids on this page, they don't exist. And any sort of photograph you'll see, none of it's all generated from the computer as such. Okay, how does it work? The user, you or me, we'd provide an input, and those inputs are called prompts. And then the AI produces an output, which would be the text or the image. The output it generates is original. And each time you put in a prompt, so you can take the same prompt and you can put it in repeatedly, and you should get a slightly different output each time. And then these prompts can also be used to automate certain processes and structure interactions with the system. You can get a prompt to then ask the system to run through a series of questions with you, to draw information from you, to work with some information you provided as well. How do you write a prompt? So you'll see there's a million blogs about how to write prompts these days, and there's all these new jobs called prompt engineer and whatever else floating about. There are several ways to do it. So it's pretty much engaging in a conversational way is the best way to get started. You can ask it a question, you can ask it to do something for you, you can have a conversation, give it instructions. I've put together some broad guidelines which most people seem to agree on. One of the best ways to get started is you can tell the system who it is. So you can say, act as if you are someone else. Act as if you are a publisher. Act as if you are a committee member of PASA, any sort of role that you give it. And then you add some constraints to that. So you can ask it to write in the style of X, write at the language level of a certain learner, write for second language speakers. So you give it some constraints so it doesn't just go off wildly and produce whatever it wants to produce it. Then you set it a task to do. So those tasks could be create content, write a paragraph on a certain topic, What I've been playing around with a lot lately is using it to generate questions. So in an educational scenario, formative assessment questions, asking it to match certain levels in Bloom's taxonomy, different sort of question types. So there's things like that you can do. And then the best way to get an outcome that you want is to provide sample content. So you can say, this is what I've done before. I would like you to do something similar. So you can upload that sample content and it will then produce something that is similar to that. Okay, so I've just written a sample prompt, and I think these will be distributed if anyone wants to look at these in a bit more detail. So you can see I started off with giving it a role. So the role is you're a seasoned grade 4 English teacher with expert knowledge of the CAPS curriculum. So that's the role. I then gave it a context and audience to work with. You're creating a quiz for grade 4 students who have recently covered a unit on narrative structures in English, and that's obviously from the CAPS curriculum. Students have a basic understanding of story elements like setting, character, and plot. Next, I've decided to give it the task, which is design a 10-question multiple choice quiz that tests their knowledge on this unit, ensure the questions are clear and age appropriate. Sample content provided said you could frame a question like, in a story, where do we usually find out about the time and the place? And then I gave 4 options there. And then some data. And this is obviously very just high-level brief data based on the CAPS curriculum. The main learning objectives for this unit include understanding the setting, identifying main and supporting characters, recognizing the sequence of events, and distinguishing the main events from details. So you can see you use this template as such to structure a prompt, which you put straight into the AI system. And the role could be anything. You can change it around, switch it around. In fact, the best way to learn is to start playing with these systems. Okay, so very brief overview of what's around at the moment. It seems to be changing with new systems getting launched all the time, but the main ones for text, which you might have played around with, is our ChatGPT. So that's the big one that launched this whole generative AI hype end of last year. Bard is Google's own competitor, I guess, to ChatGPT. Bing is Microsoft, and then Claude is another one, which is from a company called Anthroposophic, I think, something like that. And then the image generators, Midjourney, which is the one that's created all these images on the presentation, is probably the best one at the moment. The one sort of caveat with that is that you have to use Discord to create the prompts or write the prompts. DALL-E, that's ChatGPT's image generator. Stable Diffusion, I'm not sure who they are, but Firefly is Adobe. So that probably is the one, if you have graphic designers at your organization and they have access to Adobe Creative Suite, they would already have Firefly and could be playing around with that. Okay, so the best way to learn, it's definitely by doing it. So you can log in for free to most of these AI systems. For more advanced features, you might need to pay a relatively small subscription. I think the ChatGPT premium option is $20 a month. And then, just test out. So start asking it to do things, ask it how you can improve the prompt. It really is one of those skills that get better the more you do them. The other thing you could do is think through your workflow. So you can look at what potentially takes a lot of time, what feels repetitive, and then see if there's any way you can improve those or automate them. And then I really like this idea of a prompt library. So you write a prompt, it works, you copy it and save it into a spreadsheet, for example. Then you slowly build up these prompts that you can use as it goes along. Okay, let's jump into the nitty-gritty of why I think it's important for educational publishers to at least be aware of this technology. So it is going to be ubiquitous, and in fact is all over the place at the moment in any case. But the big software companies, if you use Google, if you use Microsoft products, they're going to embed it in their products, which means you'll be able to use Bard for Google and Google products, and you'll be able to use the technology behind ChatGPT and Microsoft products. I've already got it on my phone. I've got an app where I can, check things and talk to it, and it can give me responses. It's really is slowly getting everywhere, and I'm always surprised by how many teachers are actually already using it. So I did a very brief survey on teachers, just asked them to fill in some forms on LinkedIn, and I think it was around about 60-70% of teachers had used ChatGPT already. So I think teachers are definitely using it. Learners are using it, which I'm sure is freaking out a lot of teachers, particularly subjects like English and history, where you maybe need to write essays as part of your homework. But what I think it's going to do is it's going to quite dramatically change the educational system. And it's also going to change how we can develop content. So I think there's two parts that publishers need to be aware of, educational publishers need to be aware of. One is that schools are going to change because of this, and schools are our customers. The other one is that potentially the way we have created content for centuries is going to change. Okay, this I just pulled, and hopefully you can see it, but I'll read through it in any case. There's a great report. It's a LinkedIn Future of Work report, which is very much focused on AI. Just came out in this month, a couple of weeks back, where they listed a whole lot of occupations and how they could potentially be impacted by generative AI. So you can see teacher was one of the top ones, where about half of what teachers do could potentially be, they call it augmented. So, not replaced, I guess, but augmented. And those skills or tasks that teachers are doing, such as lesson planning, curriculum development, teacher training, literacy, it says, and tutoring, they think that generative AI is going to play a huge part in that. So that's almost 45% they are estimating of what a teacher does every day could potentially be augmented by AI. There wasn't publisher listed on the list, although I sort of copied that off. I guess we are too small an industry to have our own list, but I would think similar sorts of things in terms of planning and checking and a whole lot of things. But I'll go into details with those now. Okay, so now this is just my opinion on how these tools could be used as a publisher. We obviously are not using them yet. We're experimenting, we're playing around it. I think it's a bit too early to actually do live products with this sort of technology. There's a lot of issues that need to be resolved. But this, in the next year or in the next 5 years, I think this is how this technology could be used. So content generation is the big one. I'm not sure if anyone has seen what's going on in the marketing world, but basically they're already jumping straight in and they're producing blog posts, they're producing tweets, LinkedIn articles, anything you can think of in terms of what the marketing team does. They're using AI for some of those. We could, as publishers and educational publishers, potentially also start creating content. And that would be content that would be generated from a publisher's knowledge base. So maybe a database around a certain curriculum with information or activities or any sort of curriculum specific content that could be used to help generate that. And it's this whole idea of zero draft manuscripts. So it's really, in my mind, it would be more like a very detailed book plan or book template that we could generate, that then we would then workshop with authors and they would then build on that. So that's kind of the level of generation I think it's going to be useful for textbooks publishers. There definitely is a potential for publishers to start building up data sets, so around certain subjects, around grades, around content that they've produced before or are experts in. And they can then use this specific curriculum knowledge to start building out these zero draft manuscripts. I think it kind of would give you a very good start to a new project. The other thing which is possible is creating diagrams, charts, all the sort of things that we create as part of a textbook, more and more video content and interactive content. We create videos for most of our textbooks now to explain concepts and things like that. And I think that's going to be quite quickly will be available through these AI systems. Language editing. So this is an obvious one, I think, for anyone who uses Grammarly, which I assume most publishers would use Grammarly by now. Grammarly also has an AI feature, which I haven't played around with, but I saw it there now. But you can actually, use AI systems to maintain some sort of consistency in terms of style and language level. It's actually very good at language level, which I always found a bit tricky myself. But you can say, write this at the level of an 8-year-old or a grade 4-year-old, and it seems to be good at simplifying that. Language editing, changing the tone, things like that, it also seems to be quite good at. And then very good at recommendations for restructuring content, or if you're missing out something, so rephrasing and enhancing readability. So these are things that an editor does as part of their job. I think at some point they will be working with a tool like Grammarly, which will help them and guide them. And it's this whole idea of having a co-pilot, which I'm not sure if you've seen that term come up yet, but it's the idea that you'll be working with some AI system to help you improve your work and improve your output. So yeah, that's another area I think is very open for AI to be involved. This is one where I think people are already using it, to be honest. So summarizing is amazing. It manages to summarize quite complex ideas. You can summarize a whole chapter, and you can ask it to pull out the key points in that chapter. So I think chapter summaries, abstracts, things like that, I think would be a very easy and quick win for publishers to start using these AI tools for. And then automating publishing workflows. So things like checking, which is very important for educational publishers in particular. If we're going to be doing a submission, we need to check that a whole curriculum has been covered. It can be used for checking formatting and standardizing formatting. Not so much my area of expertise, but I think there's opportunities in terms of forecasting sales and forecasting the volumes of printing to be done. So there's a whole area there, which I don't really deal with in my day-to-day work, but I think it's there. And then also a whole customer research thing, which I do deal with a bit, but it would be a case of being able to collect data from customers and then use these tools to analyze that data and hopefully provide some kind of guidance or some kind of indication of what is important from that data. Okay, now this I think is important. There's this, again, another concept which they call keeping the human in the loop. So it's this idea of collaborating. So collaboration between humans and AI. Obviously, as publishers, there's an expertise that's built up, through many years of publishing. So publishing is one of those skills where you get better at it the more you do it. And that expertise in publishing can't really be taught. It's a learned skill. And I think in combination of that with some kind of AI tool to assist authors, assist editors, assist publishers is potentially where we're going to be heading. And the whole idea is to actually improve the output of our products. So we could create better textbooks more quickly if that was the need, or more efficiently. But I think that whole idea is that we don't want a computer-generated textbook. We want something that is more of a collaboration, and that the publisher obviously has the input in exactly what is being produced. Okay, challenges and risks. I think there's many, as with any new technology, and I think you would be easy to guess most of these. There's major ethical concerns at the moment. So the way these systems have been trained is on a lot of data that they've got from the internet, and a lot of that data is very much, if you think about the internet, it's a northern western product as such. So they've been trained on a lot of data that is very, I'd say, very American, and would be one way of putting it. And that they've also then got these biases that have come through. So I don't know if anyone has seen those things, but when, for example, you ask an image to create a CEO or like a businessman, they create this image of this white man in a suit. And it's what it's been trained on, all these photographs that have come through of, white businessmen in suits. So there's all these biases that you need to be aware of. Obviously, privacy issues with the POPI Act and all the other acts we need to be aware of. There's not a lot of transparency in terms of where all this training data came from, and was any of it copyrightable. I mean, I think New York Times is maybe suing one of these platforms at the moment to take their information out of the system, of the training data. So yeah, there's a lot of issues around that, and I'm not an ethic. I don't know what that word is, but I don't deal in this, but I just want people to be aware of this, because it is quite an important issue that needs to get resolved. The other thing which is unusual and really quite weird, in fact, at the moment, is that these systems create what has been termed hallucinations, which is basically very real-looking responses to your question or your query that are completely fabricated. So at one point when I first started playing around with these, I asked for a list of books for a certain subject. It gave a great list of the authors and the publishers and the book titles, and it all looked excellent. When I started to Google for these books, they didn't exist. And I think there's been a number of other issues of a similar sort of case. So you need to employ rigorous human checking. If you want to use any of this content, you have to double check everything, assume that it's not factually correct. But this is getting better. So the more people seem to use these systems, the less these hallucinations occur. Publishers actually have an excellent way of maintaining quality control. So we have systems in place for checking and proofreading. So I think if these ever become production tools, we would have already systems in place to make sure that none of these hallucinations got through to the final product. And then, just making textbooks. One of the big things about textbooks is that you've got to have correct information and facts. So that is one of the primary goals of educational publishers, to provide accurate, reliable content. Okay, there's definitely costs involved, which are always going to be an issue, particularly in publishing, which is not the most... there's not a lot of extra money floating around in publishing, I found. So to implement these systems yourself, which you can do, there's cost implications in terms of hiring people to maintain them, the actual software and the hardware you need to run them is expensive. So you've got to almost balance the cost effectiveness of, do I want a full AI system run in-house, or do I want to maybe just use the available systems and pay a fee for the premium versions? So you've got to balance this whole idea of cost effectiveness with value and innovation. So will it actually improve and increase any sort of potential outcome, or is it just using innovation for innovation's sake. Okay, the big one is intellectual property. So what happens when an AI system generates content? Who owns that content? Who's got the copyright to that content? So the United States has already come out and said that AI material is non-copyrightable. So that's if I do a prompt and it just generates some text for me, that text is not copyrightable. But there's then a gray line where it then talks about AI assisted works. So if that work is then edited quite substantially, if it's used to develop some further material, then at what point does that become no longer an AI generated work, but a human plus AI generated work, which then would be eligible for copyright? So they're still working all of these out. I haven't really seen anything coming from the South African government yet, but the Australian government did do a whole thing on copyright and AI. And I'm attending, there's a free workshop next month. Some Dutch startup is putting it on with an IP lawyer where they will be talking about these issues as well. So if anyone is interested, they can reach out to me and I can send them the link. But it's very much an area that needs to be resolved before a publisher can, use AI material in their works. You wouldn't want to get embroiled in any sort of legal battle with anyone. Okay, so this is now just my overview of what I think would be good skills for publishers to start developing in their teams. And there's four main areas. So the one, and it seems like the obvious one, is just to develop more data skills. How to use data, how do you understand it? The other one would be technical skills, how to use these systems, get familiar with these systems. And then the other two, I think, are more, I would consider them those 21st century skills. So how to innovate, how to think creatively, how to create new products out of what is available. And communication, which is, I think, becoming more and more a valuable skill, particularly as we moving into this really quite digital way of working with each other. Being able to communicate is becoming more and more valuable. So these data skills, data science skills, it's basically providing some kind of understanding on how these models work. So to understand what a large language model is, the various sorts of ways you can tweak it so that it can create either more creative work or less creative work. There's various sorts of ways of changing it to do certain things. So just being aware of how they work and what the algorithms are producing, and being understand basic data analysis and interpretation and applications. These data skills are really around what is available, and data could be anything from a spreadsheet to a textbook to whatever, and then how it can be used in these systems and why it should be used in these systems. So it's that whole sort of broad understanding of what to do with data. Technical skills, these are, I think, pretty self-explanatory, but it's more on how to use them. So the more you use things like ChatGPT and Code Interpreter and the various sort of image generators, the more comfortable you get with them and the more you start to know, okay, this one I'll use for this task. I know that I'll use Bard to do X, Y, and Z because it's connected to the internet and can then do searches for me, just to get familiar with what is available. And this technical landscape, just being aware of and keeping up to date with what's actually coming out and what is relevant to your industry and what could potentially be brought into your company. Innovation skills. This is something I am quite interested in. I remember once going for a job interview and someone telling me I had nothing innovative on my CV. This was a while back. So since then, I've started trying to experiment a bit more with trying to think more innovatively and like look at projects where you can actually creatively think about changing things. So quite often we're stuck in these certain systems we follow. This is how you produce a book. You've got the various sort of steps and phrases, but potentially there's other ways of doing it and better ways of doing it. And I think it's good to start thinking around those. The big thing is just to encourage innovation with the people you work with. Which we do. We have a small internal group where people can experiment, and then they can talk about what they've learned, either positive or negative. There's also great benefit from trialing something and it doesn't work, and you can then talk about why it didn't work and potentially how to improve it. So that whole idea around innovation, I think, is important, and trying to create that in your organization. And then the final thing was just communication skills. So this is quite an interesting one for me, because I do understand the digital side and I understand the publishing side quite well. And I've been in meetings recently where we've been talking with AI and tech people, and we've had the older sort of publishing people around, and I've almost felt the need to try and translate between the two of them. So being able to talk to both sides of the organization is a really good skill to have. And then being able to communicate these concepts, so these AI concepts, to the non-technical stakeholders. So I've been doing some presentations to government officials and to various other peoples in the organization. I mean, it's a great way to realize what you don't know, to start talking to other people. But I think it's also great to then start formulating your own thinking in a way that it's easier for other people to understand. So those were the 4 key areas I thought were very important for publishers to start working with. I do think it's very much a nascent industry or skill set at the moment, but I'm not sure if there is a one year sort of takeoff for this, or whether it's 5 years or 10 years. But I just know I'm finding it very interesting at the moment. So I'm not sure how we're doing for time, but this is the end of my presentation, and I'm